CNET, are you ready? Okay. All right, we're going to get started. What's today's date, the 25th? Good evening. I'd like to call the March 24th, 2025 State College Area School District Board of Directors work session to order. Mr. Johnson, would you like to kick us off? Maybe?
Alrighty. So today we're going to hear from Dr. Urbacher, who has done a mental health audit over the past few months. We have her on basically on Zoom, and she's going to have a PowerPoint presentation and to report out on what she found. Okay, and then we'll proceed like a normal board meeting and have time for public comment and for the board members to have any questions that they might have of her. Okay.
Sounds good. Maybe perhaps we can. There she is. Hold on.
Hold on.
Yeah, I think you're muted, or we might have you muted.
Yep.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
Of course. And I see heads turning, so I assume there are screens where everyone can see me. I was worried about that.
Yeah, one on each side.
Perfect. Great. So let me just get this going. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I obviously have spent a vast amount of time the last few months working with this review. It's been quite an in-depth experience for me that honestly has touched me deeply. I look forward to sharing these results. I think you all know who I am, so I don't need to go through that introduction, correct? But the purpose, right? So just starting here, really the purpose of this consultation was to provide an external review of state college area school districts' policies and procedures related to suicide prevention, screening, assessment, intervention, and postvention. But really, this is in the context of Abby Smith's 2024 suicide death at Park Forest Middle School. Through the last several months, since the contract was approved in September, and I'm going to go through each of these areas, but these are the methods. These are the areas we looked at. There was survey data collected with school-based pupil services teams. There were the interviews, which I think everyone is most anxious to hear about. We did the adult stakeholders in the community and school staff. And then, of course, there were interviews with students. And there was a vast review of all the school district policies, procedures, looking at the wording, what could be improved, what could be tweaked, but also what was already comprehensive and what was already wonderful. This also included a comprehensive review of the postvention response following Abby's death. And I will talk about that postvention response. I won't get into all the nitty-gritty of every single procedure and details here or there that might be minimal suggestions, but I will go into, again, the vast procedures. But before I even get started into like data, I really need to center myself too about kind of why are we here? I wanted to share how I first got into this work of suicide prevention after having lost my own father to suicide in 2001. I remember those feelings of being confused, feeling lost, and honestly wanting to know why. In my mind, he had chosen to leave me, his daughter, and I wanted to know why. So when I was asked to do this with regard to Abby, and I didn't say anything in the beginning because I didn't want it to taint any judgment about the contract or anything, but this is why I do the work. It really is honestly my heart and a passion of mine to try to save lives. Rascal Flatts has a song called Why that I just have to share it because I think after Abby's death, I want to kind of talk briefly about two other suicide deaths that happened before Abby's at the high school. And I think we're all left with this feeling of why. And again, this just touches me from Rascal Flatts. You might have heard it, but you must have been in a place so dark you couldn't feel the light reaching for you through the stormy cloud. Now here we are together, or here we are gathered in our little hometown, this can't be the way you meant to draw a crowd. Look, I can't even talk. Oh, why? That's what I keep asking. Was there anything I could have said or done? Oh, I had no clue you were masking a troubled soul. And it goes on, right? Just this feeling of being in a place so dark they can't see the light. I know that's where my dad was, and he suffered in silence. Again, mental health is complex. It's never one thing to answer that question, why? But we know that in the moment, the individual feels like they can't live with that intense emotional pain anymore. It's so dark. Um, we also know that many of these mental health issues go undiagnosed. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But the only person who could really answer that question about why after a suicide death is no longer here. So accepting that why can be really hard. But I've since understood with my own father that he did have significant mental health struggles that he told no one about. And I accepted that those struggles were even larger than his love for me. Once I accepted that, I could finally begin to move forward. And I say that because grieving, learning to move forward is quite a process and quite a journey. And that's what brought me to this review and brought me here today. So, with that, I just wanted to preface it, kind of not forgetting, not just looking at data, but not forgetting why we truly are here today. And really, that was because of Abby's death. So, first, looking at school-based teams, we did quantitative data, just surveys, right? What I wanted to understand through this was, in a pragmatic sense, making sense of procedures, making sense or understanding student services, and if they feel suitably trained in all areas of suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention, as well as for me to better understand what's in place and what might be the gaps in the protocol and the gaps in the training needs. So, results are extensive, but I pulled the most significant results for today to go through this. Now, okay, yeah. So, one of the questions, does your school district, SCADSI, have procedures in place for suicide risk screening, assessment, and monitoring? And the majority do say yes. 66% say they're in place for all three levels of screening, assessment, and monitoring. 25% said we have them, but maybe not all three of those. And then a few said, I'm not sure. Nobody said no, which is great, right? So that's good news. And then, if yes, how effective do you believe the suicide screening, specifically the screening and assessment procedures are? And the majority said, so three's in the middle, one would be not at all, whereas five is very effective. So the majority of participants were a 4 or 5, right? The majority feel like they are effective. A few are in the middle, and only 2 participants said not that effective. Does your district have procedures in place for students re-entering school after psychiatric or mental health hospitalization? And again, sharing the ones, so some didn't really show a difference across scales in terms of effectiveness or not. Showing the ones that were most significant, 66% again, say yes, we have procedures in place for re-entering. Now, this will come out during some of the interviews, but some participants had concerns about those re-entry procedures. So while 66% do say yes, 19% say partially, and some 13% say, I don't know. So when it comes to this, how effective do we believe the reentry procedures are? We can see, compared to the previous slide, less are saying extremely effective, which would be a 5. 17 or 54% are saying very effective, and then, or effective, and then 25% are sort of in the middle, with 9% saying I'm not sure, or maybe not that effective. So then we ask about training needs, right? So since beginning work at State College Area School District, what areas have you received targeted training on? And I have to say, that's a lot of training. When I look at a slide like this, honestly, there's usually areas that are significantly lower. But just to kind of walk through them, because I think they're important and valuable. 72% of participants received training on suicide risk screening, 66% on suicide risk assessment, 44% on suicide risk monitoring. And speaking of reentry procedures, that does go down to 30% for reentry procedures after psychiatric or mental health hospitalization. 63% receive training on safety planning, 50% on suicide prevention programming, 44% on suicide postvention response. But I want to talk about that because flight team training, 44% receive that, is another method of postvention response or postvention crisis protocol. And I wonder if it's the same 44% because I was not able to tease that out, that also talked about suicide postvention. I'm going to say it now in case I forget later, but one of the things we know, there are two major crisis response protocols in the research that I'm aware of. One is flight training. The other one is what's called PREPARE from the National Association of School Psychologists. It's the PREPARE model. Both flight team training and the PREPARE model focus on how to respond after any crisis, but it doesn't necessarily get into the specifics of suicide postvention. So that might be something helpful in the future to have. And I actually was just doing a training recently for staff that were PREPARE trained, and they were saying exactly that they had PREPARE training, crisis response protocol, but there are details for suicide postvention that we need to keep in mind. So suicide specific postvention is always recommended. And then 91% have had trauma informed approach training, which is amazing. So then how important do you think it would be to update your training in the following areas? And not surprisingly, the one that came out the greatest area of need was reentry planning. So if I were, in terms of, because I have recommendations for each area, my number one recommendation would be training in the area of reentry planning. And then we can see the next need followed by that is suicide postvention training. So I would recommend that. And then following that would be suicide risk monitoring. So one of the things we know from the research is that suicide risk waxes and wanes, right? It doesn't, even if someone is, hospitalized, they might have improved suicidal thoughts, but oftentimes it goes up and down with stress, depression ebbs and flows. And so really understanding how to monitor that risk over time to catch it before it becomes the next crisis event for that individual can be super helpful in preventing that next crisis event and hopefully saving the life. So those are my three areas, if I had to pick, for training need: reentry, suicide specific postvention, and suicide risk monitoring. And then for staff, I did ask, does a staff debriefing, either small or large group, occur after the following? So are we debriefing after a suicide risk assessment is completed? About 55% said yes. After a student returns from psychiatric hospitalization, or during, 69%, which is great, right? So that's 69% because having that reentry planning and debriefing when the student returns is huge. When there's a suicide death, and 83% said yes, a staff debriefing is occurring, which is awesome. Administrative support in that way, staff debriefing, hugely important to reduce or eliminate staff burnout, as well as secondary traumatization, because that's hard work after a suicide death response. So not just after the suicide death occurs, but after we do our crisis protocol in the days or weeks that follow. And 77% say yes, we are doing it then. 41% say we meet regularly to debrief all of these things, which is excellent. In terms of next steps, asking, again, people services staff, what do you feel are the most important factors in building competence in the areas of suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention? And let me preface that by saying, I don't know if they call me a suicide expert, but can I ever be? Every student is so different. Like I don't always say I'm an expert in this because I'm not an expert in each individual student, every case is so different. But when we talk about competence, asking them what would help, their number one answer is professional development. Research shows, in terms of decreasing staff burnout or that secondary trauma experience for staff, that actually having professional development that's ongoing. So even if you've already been trained in this, having ongoing trainings, because if nothing else, just like this postvention training I did the other day, I had some very seasoned staff in there. They have been through it. But they said, one, there's always a new snippet to learn. I'm always giving case examples when I talk and stuff too. But also, just if nothing else, hearing that the things you do are on the right track is super comforting for staff. So that's, the more we can continue to implement these professional development experiences, that's great. The next thing they said that would help build competence is supervision and support, and having that be ongoing along with collegial mentoring. So that debriefing with my own staff can be super helpful as well. Okay. So section recommendations. Well, first of all, significant training has occurred at SCASD, including flight team training, which is amazing and fairly impressive, to be honest. 86% of participants felt that continued professional development is the most important factor. We talked about that. And the areas would be what I said: reentry planning, suicide postvention, and suicide risk monitoring, but also having ongoing supervision and support. That's the second most important factor. So scheduling those times, making sure that that happens would be really important for staff. Okay. And then we have the interviews, the qualitative data with adult stakeholders. Now, a little bit about the method and participants here. There were 34 adults that were interviewed. They were all anonymous. Interviews via Zoom. I mean, in terms of the reporting here, they will remain anonymous. So they're self-selected, right? Anytime we do interviewing like this, nobody is forced to interview. So they're essentially self-selected. It was a rolling process. So there, of course, were certain individuals that made sense. I interview family, staff that maybe worked with a child. So it was on a rolling basis. Sometimes there was word of mouth, and then we did send out a survey for adults that wanted to be interviewed. Once we reach what's called saturation, the interviews stop. So I determined that. It wasn't determined by SCASD, but I determined when that happens. How we determine saturation is we conduct a multitude of interviews. What I then do is I start analyzing them for themes. Once I did about 20 interviews analyzed for themes, certain themes came out. Few more interviews indicated a couple other themes, but then the last about 10 interviews, there were no new themes. And I'm going to talk about what those themes were. And so the point of that is that while we would love to interview every single person who indicated interest, we don't need to, because there were not new themes. But I really do wish I could have heard everyone's stories. Honestly, I teared up a little at the beginning of today when I think about Abby, when I think about your stories. And it's a tear up again. They really are heartfelt, and I can feel her loss. I want to mention too that in these interviews, there was so much care shared for Abby and for Abby's family and for the young members of this community. Why everyone wanted this review was so that hopefully this does not happen again. So once we got these dominant themes, saturation was achieved. We did stop those interviews. Again, I wish I could have interviewed everyone who indicated interest, because I would love to hear your stories. So I said this self-selection is a limitation of qualitative study. It can lead to skewed results because maybe those with the strongest viewpoints are the ones who self-selected to talk to me. Maybe the ones that didn't offer, all we can do is offer when it's an interview. We can't obviously make anyone. And so maybe those ones who were quiet would have brought up other themes that we didn't get. So we do have to be aware of that any qualitative research has that limitation. Okay. So here are our dominant themes. I'm going to walk through them. Some of them are heavy, so we'll get through this. Okay. The first was compassion, and I just alluded to this. The most notable theme was with regard to the compassion that all respondents felt toward the parents of Abby. As one respondent stated, that family is living our worst nightmare. Respondents oftentimes stated that they tried to put themselves in Abby's parents' shoes, but they couldn't even do so as it was unimaginable. This was the undertone to every interview, regardless of other perspectives. Every respondent shared sorrow to the family for the sudden and tragic death of their daughter. My, my recommendation, right, for each part is obviously we want to continue to support the Smith Black family, especially as we are approaching the 1 year anniversary of Abby's death. The second area is this climate of mistrust. So it differed a bit depending upon if it was a community-based response or a school-based response. For community-based respondents, the majority felt that SCASD administration was not necessarily forthcoming in the aftermath of Abby's death. And at times, there were emails that were not responded to, and there was this feeling of being dismissed. And this led to a perception of mistrust. For school-based respondents, mistrust was also developed by respondents due to the perceived lack of administrative and board support following Abby's death. Now, upon thinking about this as well, I have to realize that this can feel like a no-win situation for both administration and the school board. We want to validate the family, validate the community, validate parents and stakeholders, while also not appearing dismissive, but also investigating what happened within our own district while also supporting staff. It really is, and we don't want staff to feel unsupported. We don't want community members to feel unsupported. So I can only imagine that that's a fine line, not easily walked. With regard to the climate issue, though, a recommendation is increased visibility, communication, that's clear, right? So everybody understands we're reading your emails, we take your opinion to heart, even if, we are in the middle of an investigation and we can't respond with depth right now. And in terms of staff support as a theme, that's very much tied to the climate of mistrust. It did develop as its own theme. And it was this school-based staff perceiving a lack of ongoing support, really preferring that staff, administration, building level, upper admin, board members more knew who each staff was, knew what their role was, when possible, attended complicated meetings to support through that. Checking in on staff. I know that there's an investigation after Abby's death, but also trying to walk that fine line, but also checking in on staff, making sure they are okay. And that they know we care about them as we walk through these hard times. One of the things I forgot to say when I said that I really wished I could have interviewed everybody is I'm hoping as I go through the themes that those of you who couldn't be interviewed at least hear these and my explanations of them, and maybe you can relate to it in some way. That yes, that's something I would have talked about if I was interviewed as well. So that's sort of my hope as we go through this. So the recommendation, right, is that it would go a long way to have those check-ins with school staff after crisis events and really recognizing the significant contributions and effort of school staff. There was one community respondent who really talked about, how lucky SCASD is to have such vast knowledge and expertise within the mental health staff at SCASD. Communication, again, it's aligned with the other two themes, but it also developed into its own theme. And this first, with regard to the area of communication, there was a lot of positive within teams. So within mental health teams, school-based teams, within buildings, there was a lot of support. The team seemed very strong. A lot of communication within teams. There was a lot of team meetings to effectively talk about kids. Those we're concerned about how we're going to follow up. And then there's just that sometimes communication did vary across buildings with regard to administration. And so again, being more clear and consistent with communication across buildings across the district would be really helpful. Also with regard to communication, There was a lot of confusion, we know, after Abby's death. The majority of respondents brought up letters. This was both community members, school members, brought up letters that were sent out in the aftermath of Abby's death. Similarly, respondents brought up communications after the 2021 death of David O'Connell and the 2022 death of Brandon Copenhaver. I hope I said those names correctly. That one of the concerns with those two boys after they passed is the letters felt very standardized, right? Like there was a template. And it's really hard because as a trainer, these are the things we recommend. We recommend that a school district has a template, right? But we do want to adapt the template so it is warm and so that it really conveys who the individual child was that may have passed. And in reading the notification letter after Abby's death, there was a lot of commenting with regard to Abby's warm smile, talked about her interests and her activities. So I feel like the district had already heard that concern about the template, and they really did individualize it for Abby. And so with regard to communication, after Abby's death, there was information that was later retracted. And I will talk about this a little bit more under the postvention response, but we know that there was confusion or just the beginning of an investigation, really, about whether or not there's bullying. And we'll talk more about the bullying as well, because we've hired, like I'm part of SCASD, because I feel part of you now. The district has hired Dr. Swearer to conduct the bullying review, because it is certainly not an expertise of mine. But it's important to note that the majority did feel like the letter that was sent from SCASD as a follow-up discouraged students from talking about Abby's death. So again, it's walking this fine line. We don't want rumors. Rumors are never helpful. So squashing rumors, but if you actually have information to share, we do want to hear about it, right? That's that fine line that I think was a little difficult there, but that we could certainly finesse in the future, because we never would want to send a message, please don't ever talk about it, right? That discourage kids from talking, especially talking about how they're feeling. And then social media. So in all work I do with regard to suicide postvention or anything mental health and suicide throughout the country, social media is a part of it. After Abby's death, there were many safe to say reports, concerns, texts, screenshots, posts, emails. Some were sharing concerns. Some of these related to bullying, which again is outside the scope of this. A repeated theme, however, was how bullying gets reported. And students felt that they have to determine whether or not it meets the criteria or definition of bullying, including cyberbullying, before they can make that safe to say report. And that's hard. I mean, I have a lot of adults who are not sure on that difference, like does it meet that threshold of teasing versus bullying. And students should just be encouraged to report it and let us do that work. We just want to encourage them to report, and that's huge. Another concern that came up, just tied to these posts, that there was bullying reported, and sometimes even restorative justice meetings are held, but parents are not always informed. And so in terms of recommendations, I'm going to use that as a starting point for Dr. Swearer and share that information, because obviously, parents should be informed when those things happen. And with regard to referrals, this was perhaps one of the greatest themes, but at times had opposing views. On the one side, respondents discussed and were proud of the multiple methods through which referrals can be made, right? We do have safe to say referrals can be made by school staff, students, and other stakeholders by Google form, email, phone call, in person. Safe to say it can be anonymous, which sometimes is good, sometimes can make things more confusing. There's weekly core staff meetings, counselor administration team meetings, MTSS meetings. There's lots of avenues through which staff can talk about students to ensure referral and follow-up. However, some respondents do feel like students were falling through the cracks. So I think that having a way that all referrals are, no matter how they come into us, because I would never want to tell a parent, like, don't tell me in person that you're concerned about your child, right? That's a great avenue, but all of these should be immediately logged somehow so that this can't fall through the cracks, because that obviously is a concern. There's also under referrals, that a concern with regard to staff ratios, which I do talk about briefly later. But school mental health professionals, and that includes school psychologists, school counselors, school social workers, there's often a feeling of overwhelm, right? Like, I'm supposed to be writing this letter of recommendation, but there's a crisis, but then I have to do this. Like, there's a lot of expectations, which can be really challenging, especially when we're not necessarily meeting staff ratios. So it's a lot. And because of that, I think sometimes we get burnt out as school mental health professionals, and then students don't always feel connected to us because we might be giving an image that we're too busy, and that's not what we want for students. Um, so I think just being able to take that step back, right? It's really important that individually, as a school mental health professional, I take that step back and reflect on my own mindset, my own self analysis in terms of, am I building rapport with students? Am I meeting their needs? What do I need to do to make sure I can more effectively do that? Okay. Um, Liability came up. I think, here we are doing this external review, and I think there's just people are school staff specifically. There's a lot of concern. What can I do in the future? What can I do? When called in to do an external review like this, everyone gets a little afraid, and that's not what we want. So, anyone who did bring it up, I talked about what liability really means. When we talk about liability, there's two things we look at specifically with regard to suicide risk. One is foreseeability. Could we foresee? Now, that doesn't mean predicting the future, right? It means someone said she's talking about suicide, but then the second piece is negligent. We are negligent in our actions. And it's a gross negligence. It's not, I asked if she was okay and she wasn't honest. Like, how do we know? It's a gross negligence where I just am not following through with district procedure. Um, one one precedent with regard to negligence that is extremely clear is that schools have been found liable for failure to notify parents. And so that should be a part of our procedures anytime we're talking to a child about suicide risk. We said earlier, there's never one reason why someone dies by suicide. Suicide is complex. Listen, if it was that simple, then suicide prevention would be simple, right? If it was just one thing, then I would have a lot more success solving this problem as a suicidologist, and suicide rates of our youth would not still be going up. But they are. So we know that suicide risk also waxes and wanes. There's a researcher, Nick Knott, who found that suicidal thoughts within a 4-hour period can change. So if I meet with a child during second period today and they're not reporting suicide risk, I need to call those parents, because within a 4-hour period, something could have changed in their life that changed their suicidal thoughts. And now we do have a problem. So we need to be really aware of that. But that's our number one, concern with liability. Just always calling parents is the recommendation. Another central theme: schools are not mental health facilities. This was a central theme in many of the interviews. One respondent noted that the district strives hard to break the stigma of mental health, so much so that they seem to have forgotten they're an educational institution. Another respondent stated there's a growing trend that the school district is responsible for all of mental health. So it's hard because we are a public school. And as someone mentioned, but you're also physically a respondent, but you can't be, but we feel like we have to be fully responsible for every single student's physical and mental well-being. That is not the school's purpose or really possibility. So, school mental health professionals at SCASD do a lot. They feel like they do a lot, yet they are the first to receive criticism or blame. So, that's obviously a concern. Despite the realization, oh, and then programming. So, despite this realization, this is another theme with regard to programming. Despite the realization that schools are not mental health facilities, the majority of respondents spoke in depth about the significant amount of programming available at SCASD. This was an overwhelming theme as the majority of respondents compared SCASD to other local districts, saying that SCASD's services are vast in comparison to 45 minutes down the road. Many feel that this is both stakeholders in the community and school staff feel that SCASD goes above and beyond with regard to youth mental health. Another respondent stated that SCASD has been and continues to be at the leading edge of addressing youth mental health issues in schools. So many qualitative interviews discuss specific aspects of programming. I'm going to briefly just show some of them, but this is not even comprehensive with everything going on at SCASD. It's certainly not exhaustive. There's more. So, in terms of school-based mental health teams, right? This team meets weekly throughout the school year with all of these individuals to work on helping students who need support. That's an amazing team right there. In terms of recommended ratios, these are from the national organization. So ASCA, the Association of School Counselors of America. Did I just say that right? The recommended ratio is 250 to 1. For the National School Social Worker organization, 250 to 1 is the ratio. We're not meeting those in most of the schools, but we also, I do want to say, have many external staff that are filling in those gaps. School psychologist to student ratio from our national organization recommended is 500 to 1. So we do have many external staff filling in these gaps. But if I were to make a recommendation, it would be, if budget allows, would be to hire more school counselors, school social workers, possibly more school psychologists. But I'm a school psychologist, I might be biased. But definitely the other two, because they are overwhelmed. When we look at some of the SELs, social emotional learning initiatives going on in the district, I mean, just the health and physical education curriculum across levels is huge. There's second step, there's Character Strong. And then on the right, there's so many things we're doing: culturally responsive practices, restorative practices, school-wide positive behavior support, suicide awareness training, MTSS, SAP, Mental Health Matters Club. That's awesome. A mental health summit and more. So again, these are just not, it's not an exhaustive list. And then community partnerships. I don't know how my name got big there. That was not intentional. So look at all the community partnerships. Many of those, and I had an opportunity to speak with many of these individuals. Many of these have been ongoing for quite some time. At the same time, we're not leaving it there. There's so many new initiatives and partnerships always going. I love the Mindfulness Connections, the Mental Health Summit, which we just talked about, Care About Kids, Community Conversations event on mental health, this external review, and of course, we will be following this with Dr. Swearer's bullying review. I know there's still a lot of questions. When I spoke to respondents, there was a lot of comments. I still had a lot of emails, about bullying, and I've forwarded many of those already to Dr. Swearer. So back to the dominant themes, that was about programming. We did talk in the themes about many of those external services, those relationships, right? The community partnerships that we're working with. That's wonderful. One of the themes that did come out was how useful, how helpful and beneficial to the district those relationships are. At times, there can be confusion about whose role is what. Is it internal? Is it external? So some clarity there, at team meetings might be helpful. It also came out that after Abby's death, there was some confusion about when, like in a suicide postvention response, when it's appropriate to use those community partnerships versus internal staff. Some felt that we should have pulled more external services in because staff were also, touched by Abby's death. But others felt like our, internal staff could handle it. So it was okay. But some clarity on that difference would be helpful. In terms of the postvention response, I will talk about that more in the postvention response section. But what was talked about here a lot was that overwhelmingly, the majority felt that the response was comprehensive overall. That school staff, school mental health staff, felt that the flight team training they received was very helpful. They had it before the death so they could be proactive rather than reactive. They felt like having the protocol helped immensely, and any lessons learned, because it wasn't perfect, their response was not perfect, any lessons learned could only be used to improve their system. I don't want to say the next time because I'm hoping there is not a next time, but should it be needed. Is there sufficient support staff? I addressed that. The ratios are concerning, and it leads staff to feel like they're tight with students and they need to be quicker than maybe they need to be. Again, SCASD has ongoing efforts toward trying to improve this. They developed 2 new lead school psychology positions this year. They also, recent years, have included hiring licensed mental health clinicians as school-based employees. There's now 3 throughout the district. Excuse me. So that's, again, just showing SCASD's efforts to always be moving forward. Again, if there was a recommendation, it probably would be to hire more school counselors. In terms of language, words matter. When I was doing, as a suicidologist, we know that there's a lot of stigma still with regard to suicide. And I do this work to try to rid that stigma. And our language matters. When we say something like committed suicide, that term is something we don't use in the field anymore because of the stigma associated with it. It's like commit murder. There's stigma, there's shame, there's wrongdoing associated with it. Instead, it fails to capture the mental health issue that led to the person dying. So instead, we just say they died by suicide, removing the culpability from the person who lost their life. They were suffering. We also refrain, and these are words I heard throughout the interviews, we refrain from saying things like a successful suicide attempt. That's not a success if a person died, right? Or unsuccessful suicide attempt. No, they lived. That's not unsuccessful. Instead, we just say it was a suicide attempt or they died by suicide. Together, I really do believe, it takes little things like that we can all do to help change the stigma regarding suicide, to break that stigma. And then finally, redundancy. And this is my longest section, by the way, because I know everyone's interested in this as well. School district interview respondents noted that following Abby's death, there was an internal review as well as a police investigation. Central Intermediate Unit 10, their flight team coordinator attended a debriefing session to provide an external review of the postvention procedures. That coordinator was reportedly very impressed and even took notes on some of the wonderful things SCASD did to learn for her own improvement. There was also a school climate assessment just conducted in September of 2024. Many school staff felt that this should have been sufficient, and that while they're always grateful to fill in the gaps of programming, this review felt a bit redundant. And I share that because other staff said that once the contract went through for this and they knew it was kind of happening, it's like the scuttlebutt stopped regarding it. And people felt like because we were not talking about Abby. That's not what we want to stop, right? But we want to stop the he said, she said, the wrongdoing, that kind of thing. That finally it allowed for some healing. So my hope is that through this review, there's a lot of recommendations through the review. The district has already begun to take many of those and begun to move forward with them so that we can hopefully let us learn and improve from this and continue to heal, grow, and move forward. So I covered many of these recommendations as I went through. I'm going to talk about that 1-year anniversary a little bit later as well. But administrative support by attending MTSS meetings with more frequency, improve visibility of central administration to know staff individually. I hit on a lot of these already. Outward support of administration and school board for school staff, checking in after crisis events, recognizing all the awesome contributions of school staff. We do want to have those templates, right? To be ready, because it's really hard to be reactive. We want to be proactive, but making sure we include warning signs, how to help someone, and making sure we individualize them like we did in talking about, Abby's warm smile. We will do the bullying review by Dr. Swear. Parent trainings on safe to say and suicide risk might be helpful. So parents have, some idea on what the warning signs are, what to do if they're concerned, because I think that's one of the things we're always concerned about after a suicide death, especially as our own children. Also reviewing our referral procedures, I talked about this, and student tracking to make sure nobody falls through the cracks, and keep those team debriefing meetings going. The majority of respondents said they're happening. We want to keep that. Consider resiliency approaches. That came from, I didn't mention it specifically, but really this idea that, sometimes we do have to improve our coping strategies, right? So some resiliency would be beneficial. Consider adding additional licensed clinicians throughout all levels, counselors, especially at the high school. Remember that the majority of SCASD school staff go above and beyond. We want to make sure we do ongoing Act 71 training, which is suicide prevention training for schools. I talked about words mattered and moving forward. I mentioned this, but really the idea that these interviews, I hope, are helpful because storytelling really is a way to share experiences, emotions, and perspectives. The act of sharing can be deeply therapeutic, allowing us to process and make sense of our experiences, connect with others, and gain new insights into our own lives. This is why I get choked up on parts of this talking about these interviews, because it was very moving speaking with many of you. But storytelling isn't just about sharing one's own experiences. It's also a way to connect with the universality of the human experience. Through stories, we can come to understand that we all face similar challenges, have similar emotions, and share similar hopes and fears. This shared connection can foster a sense of empathy, understanding, and shared humanity that's essential for healing and personal growth. So again, if you were not able to tell your story, if I was not able to interview you, I hope you can connect with some of those themes that we talked about today. All right, and then the student interviews. The student interviews, we sent, actually, let me go to the next slide here. We sent an email to parents because it had, they're minors. We had to go through parents asking who wanted to be interviewed. And we would require both parents' permission, parent consent, and student assent. They had to agree to do it. The email was sent to parents of students in grades 7 through 9. Those were the students who were most likely to know Abby. All in all, who responded to the email? There were 8 participants that responded for their child. Of those 8, 5 were interviewed. What happened to the other 3? 1 didn't respond when I followed up. I always follow up 3 times, followed up with 3 times to sign up for an actual interview slot. 1 wanted a time during the day. I offered times during the day for school, and then they didn't sign up. And then the third one was signed up for a time slot, But shortly before the interview time, the parent generously emailed me and said that it was just too difficult for the student to talk about. They were having a good day and they didn't want to go back there. And I completely understand that. Honestly, that was my concern about doing some of the student interviews. That at this point, many hopefully have done some healing, right? Excuse me. Have hopefully begun to find a way. I'm not never going to say move on because we don't move on, but we move forward. And so it is hard to go back, right? And relive this. It can be traumatic. It can be traumatizing. It can be triggering for trauma. And I was hesitant to do these interviews because I did not want to re-trigger anybody's trauma because that's not helpful. So we did do 5. Because of that, I'm not sure we reached saturation. I did not have enough data to say that we did. Other limitations besides saturation likely not being achieved. It's also self-selected. The parents had to self-select their child and the child had to self-select. Both had to agree. So there were limited participants. I will still share what came out of it. Again, not believing that we reached saturation. So there might be other themes that would have come out. For the interviews we did do, these were the dominant themes. The first was about healing. All students interviewed, again, limited participants, we have to be real here. All students interviewed mentioned healing, stating things such as, I was able to have a good summer. And now that some time has passed, they report they are doing well. Some even said they're happy. They're able to be happy, which is what we want. A few students stated that they'll never forget Abby. They will always miss her, but they're able to move on and live life. Rumors after Abby, they bring me to tears too. Rumors after Abby's death was brought up by several of the students interviewed, stating that they heard several different types of rumors after her death, including about bullying. They stated they have no idea if the bullying was true or not, but as rumors persisted, they seemed to become real. 2 respondents reported that from their perspective, Abby was not bullied. They felt like it was important that we don't ignore or discount mental health and mental illness. One student equated mental illness to cancer in this light and stated that we need to talk about mental illness rather than trying to blame it on something else. And then postvention and mental health support. Students who engaged in SCASD's postvention response after Abby's death by attending safe rooms noted that no professionals debriefed them. So when they were in the safe room, they were, offered coloring pages, a place to grieve with friends. They could have gone up to a staff member, but a staff member did not sit with them to debrief them and walk them through the stages of how to move forward in the next day or two. While affording an opportunity for youth to grieve together is important, debriefing is equally integral. One student did become protective of SCASD staff, stating that it's not their job, noting that SCASD counseling staff this is from their perspective, are trained for scheduling and are not trained for this sort of thing, meaning the mental health support after Abby's death. So many students did mention receiving support from friends, parents, and outside therapists. One student did become tearful during this portion of the interview when noting the perceived lack of support. And obviously I was uncomfortable ending the interview with the student. I did ask the parent to join the Zoom call to comfort the child and talk through it with me before we got off that phone call. A recommendation from that. So I am less familiar with the flight team training. Everything I had heard sounded wonderful about it until I got to the student interviews. So I did recommend that SCASD consider the other training, at least looking at it, which is the PREPARE training from the National Association of School Psychologists. I am more familiar with that training. What I do like about it is it actually gives like an agenda. So when you are meeting with students in the aftermath of something like this, it actually walks staff through how to walk a student through this. So, giving the student an opportunity, for example, to share their experiences, but we're not going to open that up and then send them back to class, right? It's like we open it up, tell me about Abby and your relationship with her, but then how can you begin to heal? And it's like walking through that path, that beginning that journey, so they can begin, it's only beginning that healing process. While the coloring pages and being with friends is super important, I think that agenda might be the key piece we were missing here. I already talked about that. And then review of the postvention response following Abby's death. Again, the flight team training, a lot of what was done was amazing. So these are summarized details. There was a lot more specifics, but communication occurred immediately upon hearing about Abby's death with the flight team and administration. The flight team was activated immediately by the director of student services, and they convened immediately on a Sunday evening. SCASD communications team quickly developed communication and letters. There was a point of contact with the Smith Black family that was established. Permission was given of the family to say it was a suicide. Listen, which I really respect. I can't imagine how a family's feeling in that moment. But by allowing a district to say it was a suicide, that's how we can find out if other kids might be thinking the same thing. And it's the having open conversations with them is the best thing we can do to hopefully save another life. So I really honor and respect that the family was willing to say that. There was a faculty meeting before school on Monday at Park Forest Middle School to share the facts, prepare the faculty and staff for their expectations of the day, and provide informational material. Flight team members met even prior to that, early that morning. There was an extended homeroom at Park Forest Middle School to read scripts, facilitate discussions. Special attention was paid to the homeroom of Abby's close friends. Support was offered to teachers. And school mental health professionals were available to read letters with the classes if they felt they needed it. The library was set up as a safe room. Staff from other schools did step up to support Park Forest Middle School so that they could meet with students. Other staff took on some of the other roles. Triage continued to identify students in need of support. Referral forms were created to identify students who might need support. There were lists of students to follow up on. That remained fluid and ongoing. Parents of students who were very upset were contacted for follow-up. Band lessons were canceled so students who needed a comfortable space could hang out in the band room. I even heard there was like a therapy dog there. There was a circle for staff was also offered at the end of the day as a way to debrief and ask questions. And there was a grief support group over the summer. Resources were provided to families. There are some of the examples of feedback provided to the flight team included the following from a school staff member to the flight team members saying, "You are all amazing. Thank you. I don't know how you did it all." Another respondent shared that upon emailing a teacher regarding a concern of her child who was struggling with Abby's death, an immediate response was provided, offering a seat change and letting the parent know that work groups would be mixed up. As recommended by the Star Center. Star Center is out in Pittsburgh. They do a lot of suicide prevention work. My friend Paula McCummins is over there. These are two important considerations after a student death, right? Seat change, talking to parents, mixing up groups. And some families described that their children felt very supported in the aftermath of Abby's death. Similarly, some families described that their children were well supported in the aftermath of the suicide deaths of David O'Connell and Brandon Copenhaver. One respondent stated, "How can all parents feel as supported as we did?" Now there were, and again, these are summarized. It's not every detail in the full report, but these are most of them. Abby's, so areas of growth, right? Some concerns that we do want to make sure that for next time, like we said, we're always learning. We know that Abby's name is not immediately removed from the student information system. We want to make sure that that's something we always do. Communications following the suicide, there was confusion. So we want to make sure we get our facts and we send out that communication. and that we communicate with all levels and programs, including those who are virtual. We do want to make sure we are reaching out to students who enter the safe room. You know, they're there. We want to greet them because some were not even greeted upon entering that room. And we want to offer that debriefing. There should be clear sign in, sign out procedures for the safe room. Some students said they walked in, they kind of walked out, not sure they signed in anywhere. There should be someone at a desk at the front, making sure for accountability, we know where all students are at all times. Then making sure there's ongoing support following the safe rooms, improving triage to capture all the layers of need. This was also noted as a concern with David and Brandon, that maybe certain groups, close friends were followed up on, others weren't. We just want to make sure we get all those layers of support. You know, when I do these postvention trainings, I talk about the ripple effect of suicide, you know, and it's not only the close friends who actually are impacted by a suicide death. And what research shows is those who are most at risk for suicide following a suicide death is actually not that close friend group because they know the pain of that loss. It's one circle out that is actually most at risk. So we need to really be aware of that. Utilization of internal versus external supports. We did talk about that in the other section. The procedure for school staff attendance at funerals. It's great if school staff attend, making sure, you know, we're clear on our role at that funeral, greeting families, being there as a mental health support. Consider parent meetings in the aftermath of any crisis event. I said this earlier, but I'll reiterate it. You know, when a child dies by suicide, many other parents, you know, some are adept at the warning signs of suicide, but some aren't. So, really talking about what normal grief looks like, but when to be concerned about your child, talking points for parents, you know, how to talk to their child about something really hard is super important, especially when, you know, some adolescents just want to be in their room all day, right? So, how do we support them? A parent meeting can be very helpful. Ongoing debriefing with school crisis response staff. Consider developing a memorial policy. And I did give a sample to the district. A memorial policy is recommended because after a suicide death, the research is very clear that we don't want to glamorize the suicide death. And what the research means by that is make the student appear larger in death than in life. What happens, like, if a famous person dies by suicide, an actor, a musician? Suicide rates across the country go up because it's sensationalized in the news media. And it's like, well, if he could do it, now it becomes a very real option for me. So schools are also put in a precarious position where they know this and they're trying not to sensationalize it. They're trying not to do these things, but also we want to remember the student. We want to remember Abby. And so how do we do that? The other thing to consider is we don't ever want the response for a suicide death to look different than the response of a student who died in a car accident or from cancer, because one student is not more important than the other. So if we have a memorial policy in place, that allows us to treat the students equally importantly while also not sensationalizing that. We want to make sure we have training in culturally sensitive crisis response, including our LGBTQIA youth, suicide prevention and awareness, that there are, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but really having more involvement with students in suicide awareness, public service announcements can be really helpful. And then having go kit boxes, that's making sure we have stress balls and tissues and all those things, drinks, snacks we might need in a postvention response. And the review of the school-based protocol. I reviewed a lot of these. I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go into, you know, specifics because they were vast, they were comprehensive. Any of my recommendations were to improve wording and things like that. None of it was very significant because there's so much that's wonderful and already there. The flight team training and protocol is, I mean, as staff said, it helped them be proactive rather than reactive. Suicide screening procedures were reviewed. The health education and SEL, there's too many to list, although I did end up listing them. SAP, MTSS, the school-based mental health teams, all of the collaboration, the addition of the mental health clinicians and those mental health partnerships. There's an initial debriefing form, self-care for clinicians. Other recommendations that are more general, always contact parents. That communication is of so much importance, especially knowing the waxing and waning of suicide risk. But also, there's a lot going on in a child's life outside of school. So parents should have the information that we had a pretty tough conversation. So at SCASD, we do suicide risk screening and often refer out for assessments. Sometimes there might be a time where it's more beneficial to do the assessment in district. So consider if we'd want to do training on that at some point. We talked about reentry planning as a need for professional development, and I did share a sample reentry plan with the district. I did also, in terms of suicide-specific crisis response or postvention, share a checklist we had created on tasks to consider, again, to be proactive and make sure nothing falls through the cracks after a suicide loss. I also gave a sample safe room sign-in sheet to make sure we know where students are at all times. We did review threat assessment procedures as well, so tied to suicide. We know there is a link that students who threaten violence toward others, especially like mass violence, homicide, also have suicide risk. Whereas the opposite is not true. Most people have suicide risk, would never think of hurting another person. It's pain, it's internal pain. They would never want to harm anyone. So, but there is certainly a link. We talked about improved communication and administrative involvement in MTSS and SAP team meetings. There's also the universal best screener that we're using. So some staff did, as we talked through it, have concerns, not just staff, parents, stakeholders, respondents, about the effectiveness of it. So it might be time to just revisit it. There was some concern because students are doing it with relative frequency, that they're kind of over it, So I think really revisiting that might be super helpful, and maybe it is effective as a screener. And then revisiting, this came up, partial hospitalization programming at the middle and the high school. I know we have it at the elementary school, and some would love to bring this back for middle and high school. So revisiting the possibility of that. And then ensuring all referrals are followed up on. And of course, there will be consultation with Dr. Swear as the bullying expert. Final thoughts. SCASD's already reached out to me about implementing several of the recommendations noted, and they know how to reach me if there's questions about anything else, but they've asked many already. Dr. Swear will conduct a bullying review. We do want to begin plans for the 1-year anniversary of Abby's death, while making sure not to glamorize it or sensationalize it. We don't want to increase suicide risk of others during that time. I already talked about the memorial policy. One suggestion might be, a walk, run, an event, some other kind of event to raise funds that go back towards suicide prevention, right? Your local suicide prevention task force, or survivors of suicide, or the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, who they're always doing research on this. So something like that, a scholarship in Abby's name, something like that, the research finds to be extremely beneficial. It's in Abby's name. It's a way to remember her while also not sensationalizing it. The good news is healing from the student perspective. Healing is happening, and that's what we want. We want that continued growth. We want that continued healing. I know it's not easy. And when I was in graduate school, we learned the grief process, right? That you go through the whole DABDA, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and you reach acceptance. But that's not how it works. When you lose someone to suicide, it is not just like you reach acceptance and your grieving is done. Because then a song comes on, or graduation comes, or another important event, and that person's not there. And the grieving starts all over again. So grieving, healing is not like ever just done. It's an ongoing process, but it is happening. I do not take it lightly that so many of you shared your thoughts and let me into your hearts. To Mr. Smith and Mrs. Black, this project touched me deeply, as you guys can tell. I'm so sorry for the loss of your beloved daughter. And I want you to know that so many adults and students I interviewed expressed their condolences to you. Excuse me. Didn't expect this at a board meeting. Okay. It's been a gift for me to be able to work with all of the members of this community who are both grieving and who want to do better. We are all human and we learn with each experience. I wish I could have met with every stakeholder who wanted to share their personal journey. While everyone did not have a chance to share their story, my hope is this review can begin that path forward. Let me know if I can help in any of that movement forward. And that is it for me. I know there's time for comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abracker. I think I'm going to start with board members who have clarifying questions.
I hope I can answer.
I have no doubt you can. Or if they have comments they want to share.
Yeah.
Okay, Anne,
Is my mic on?
might just need to be
Yep.
closer.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. It was a very important contribution you've made to our community, and so we are deeply grateful for your expertise and care. I don't know if it's on or not.
Just closer.
Just close. Okay. I do, in addition to an expression of gratitude. Okay. Now, in addition to expression of gratitude, you did talk about the difference between the flight team and approach, and I think it's called Prepare.
Correct.
Could you speak to, there's expertise. Our team has used that, and so that they have an agility, familiarity with that.
Yeah.
If you transitioned to Prepare, that's a whole new learning curve. And so we want to protect our kids and our community. And so if you could think or share a little bit about the benefits of Prepare. I worry about shifting when we
Yeah.
lose some of the expertise. And so that was a point you raised. I wondered if
Yeah.
we could Goldilocks it at all, like a little here and a little there, or if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say because I really value and respect your point about the expertise, right? We have this model, we're learning this model, we've been using the flight team training. But yes, my recommendation might be just that. Have 3 staff go to a Prepare training. I made up 3, a few. Absolutely. The part that I think would be so beneficial, there's like a delay on my thing, are these agendas. So 100%, there's agendas for parent meetings at the Prepare training. There's agendas for the student meetings. There's agendas for individual meetings with students that might need to happen. And so yes, you could take what you need from the Prepare training and add it into the flight team training to make the most beneficial thing for your district.
I do hope you heard the expression of gratitude as well.
I can't hear you.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Just gonna let it go.
Anne expressed a lot of gratitude, so she is also moved and
I also want to explain the next steps, just so you're aware. Just like we do with all audits, we had a number of audits in the past years that I've been superintendent, equity audit, special education audit. So what we do is we create an action plan. That action plan will be presented to administrators and our student services for input, and then we bring it to the board for information, so you're aware of what steps will be taken and how we took the recommendations from Dr. Erbacher to move forward. Okay, so at a later date, you'll be receiving that as we do, and then we'll receive updates throughout the years.
Thank you. I think just interested in just getting her immediate feedback on that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Completely understand the timeline.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Yes, Gretchen?
Thank you so much for your report. This has been really helpful, I think, for everyone. I did have just a couple questions for you. I was wondering, for the survey data, you had written that your N was 36, and I'm just wondering what the response rate was. Do you know how many people that was sent out to?
Actually, because I didn't send it out directly, so it was sent to all pupil services staff. So I do not actually have that information about how many it was sent to.
Okay, so we don't know the response rate then, I
We
guess.
do not.
Okay.
I do not know.
Yeah, okay. And then another question I had was, unless I didn't see it, throughout the report, I saw under who is involved in suicide prevention and intervention activities, there's a very long list that respondents gave. What I didn't see was teachers, and I did see PE wellness teachers, and I have a follow-up question about that. But just because students spend, a lot more time with teachers than they do, counselors or clinicians, in terms of, risk assessment, and I don't want to use that term specifically, but if teachers have a concern about a student or notice something abnormal that they want to report, I just thought it was interesting that teachers were not in the report at all, other than teaching about suicide in the health curriculum. Was there a reason to omit them?
Yeah, so that question is more about the pupil services response. So it's going to include administrators, nurses, and then some people wrote in certain responses because there's always an other, and that's where the PE came in. But because it's pupil services response, it's more about who's responding. In certain districts, administrators are not involved in that response. So it's for me to get a feel within pupil services who's responding. That's all. It's
Okay.
not about making referrals because, yeah, absolutely, teachers can make referrals. That's not what that's looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because teachers spend the most amount of time with students, so it would have been interesting to know what their perceptions about all this was as well.
Listen, I would love to do a teacher survey.
Let me see.
But Dr. Urbacher, were there teachers in the interviews though, however, potentially, when we talk about stakeholders?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, I was
Yep,
talking about the
100%.
survey.
Totally.
Yes.
I just wanted it,
Yeah.
for a second, it sounded like teachers weren't able to be involved at all. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
And then and Dr. Urbacher might not know the answer to this, I'm not sure, but it seemed like there was, going back to the PE, I know the PE teachers teach the health curriculum, and I'm just curious, are they, do they have specific training in delivering the curriculum on suicide?
That's a great question. And I do not know that answer.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just interested in knowing, because if they're feeling overwhelmed or uncomfortable, then we may think it's happening, and it
Yeah.
may or may not be, or maybe,
So all
depending
ti-
on their comfort level.
All teachers are receive training on suicide awareness and prevention. It's required by state through PCCD, and Jana Marie Foundation also attends various different faculty meetings and does trainings as well.
Yeah, I was
And it-
talking about the actual curriculum.
Right. And yeah, and the curriculum, right? Like the grade 3, how emotions impact my behavior. Where is all that coming from? I'm assuming it's a set curriculum. And then once we get to suicide prevention in grade 8, it is QPR training, which is a very set program. So they would receive training on that, but it looks like Jana Marie's doing the QPR training specifically. Same with teen mental health first aid. That's a very specific program in grade 9, which also Jana Marie is doing. So, yeah, that's a great question. And my assumption is there's some sort of training or model for curriculum that they're following for these other ones.
Gretchen, I know you know this, but just for the public's understanding, all of our PE teachers are dual certified as both PE and health teachers, is my understanding. So we don't just have PE teachers being handed some information and they teach it. They are certified and trained to provide that curriculum. So I don't know, I can't speak to specific training, but certainly if they're trained on health curriculum, my expectation is they do receive some baseline at least of that.
Yeah, so I was assuming that as well, but I have had teachers tell me that the sex ed is part of the health curriculum and they had no training in that and therefore didn't feel comfortable teaching it. So is it correct then that Jana Marie delivers this curriculum, not the PE teachers? Got it. Okay, that's helpful. I know you all are incredibly you're experts in this field, so that's good to know. And then I just wanted to, I guess, 2 more things. One is, Curtis, what you said about, getting back to the board on different things that have been implemented and the recommendations that have been executed. Dr. Ehrbacher, you said that several already have been, that the district has reached out to you about several of these recommendations and is already working on them. I think that'd be helpful for the board or the community to know what those are and that they're happening. So they already have been happening, but to know exactly what's happening, I think would provide some comfort to the community. So not only sort of keeping up with it, but then if we could have like a timeline of, is this going to be an update every 3 months, every 4 months, just so that it doesn't get, fall by the wayside. Because we have this wonderful report. It's this, active document, in terms of this is what is to be acted on, which you've already mentioned. So just so that it is, there are deadlines, so to say, of, when they'll happen. Just so that the board and the community is aware of the good work that's happening. I think we all would, want to know these good things that are happening. And then I just wanted to say one other thing, which is I know the sort of mood, so to say, has, there's a different perspective from staff than there is from the community or from certain families or, depending on your lens. And you mentioned this a lot, and obviously everybody in this room is aware of that. And I just wanted to say that it is a duty of the school board to provide oversight. And so that is something that the people who elect us expect of us. And that has nothing to do with blame or fault or finger pointing or anything like that. That is just us doing our jobs. So I just felt like I should say that out loud because that's just factually true. And so let's not forget that, because of course we know everybody has been affected by this in ways that I think the word unimaginable is what you said. I think that's a good word to use. For lack of anything better. And so, there's sympathy for all of us, I think. And we're not saying there's not, but again, everybody has a job to do in reaction to things like this. And, we would be negligent in our job as elected officials from people who elected us to do this if we didn't ask these questions. So, again, thank you so much.
Just for clarification's sake, the action plan will consist of timelines and the things that we have already accomplished, which were quick hitters, and things that we need to do. So it will be all that will be in the action plan that will be presented to the board.
I think the memorial policy is slated to come up soon on our policy development committee. Aaron, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I just had a couple of things I wanted to mention and just sort of thoughts. When I look sort of at earlier in the report at the survey questions, so things like question 7 and question 9, the one focuses on, does the district have procedures in place for suicide risk screening, assessment, and monitoring, and procedures in place for students re-entering after a mental health hospitalization. Did you, I know you mentioned nobody said no. Was your sense that this was a pretty good score, or is it one that we really should be concerned about? Because my takeaway was that that needs to be as close to 100% as possible if we're doing it well. Would you agree?
Yeah, you're never gonna get 100%, but yes, I would like that. I mean, you have 66% for question 7 who say they have procedures for screening, assessment, and monitoring. But that's saying we have all 3. You have another 25% saying you have some of them. But what came out was also that it's the monitoring piece that staff need more training on. So that's my assumption of what's missing there. And that's why that was recommended for a training, an area for training. Same with the reentry. I would like that higher, but staff also identified that that's an area of training need.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. I appreciate that. I wanted to say about the interviews and your theme analysis in particular. I thought it was very thorough, and I appreciated this is the kind of thing that I was hoping we could get out of it. I really appreciate that you started with essentially the empathy and compassion that I think everybody feels. You said you found it in your interviews. I found it in talking to community members as well. So I think that's a good starting point to address the next thing, which is that climate of mistrust. And my sense from reading this and from hearing you talk is that the climate of mistrust was across the board, so to speak. Really everybody you talked to, or each of the different constituent groups, had some way of feeling a sense of mistrust. And I want to point out to the board, by the way, that this is an example of why I like qualitative research, because you will almost never get that detailed of a theme out of a survey, right? Just a basic survey, and understanding why there was mistrust in the first place and why it persists. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think we need to take a serious look at that one in particular going forward, rather than just saying we have an action plan and we're going to change this and this. To me, a climate of mistrust among staff and among community members is a problem that goes beyond Dr. Erbacher and the recommendations, and something that I think we need to seriously think about. So I guess a question for you, since we're the board, did you get any comments or any sense about what board members or the board could do differently in these moments? Because I will say for me personally, I felt some sense of paralysis, and it sounds like staff wished that there was more visibility.
Yeah, I can understand that paralysis too. But yes, I think, the more, what's the word I'm looking for, but the more forthcoming we can be, right? Like, I love that, we just said, hey, we want to know what we're already doing to move forward. And someone mentioned the memorial policy is next on the agenda. Like that kind of thing, the more forthcoming we can be with the community about what we're doing, how we're doing it, when we're doing it. I just think that detail for people is really helpful. That it's not like we're not hiding anything. It's right out there. Here's what we're doing. Just being visible with it, being open about it, can go a really long way. And I think just, starting now, next school year, we just have a different method of communicating that's more open. And I think that would really help stakeholders feel like you're taking this information and moving forward with it.
Okay. And one last thing, I just had a question about the response, the postvention piece of that. You kind of listed a lot of the resources that we had, and it mentioned a summer support group.
Mhm.
Could you speak? Did you get details about what that was? Because I was not aware of that, and I think there are other people who probably weren't aware of that either.
From my understanding, it was offered by Jana Marie. It was something that, oh, I see. No, okay. That was from my understanding
Okay.
that it was offered from Jana Marie, that students were or parents were informed of it at the end of the school year or right at the beginning of the summer. I'm not sure many or any students attended, but it was offered.
Okay, so we maybe would need to do a better job of advertising that and making sure that we get that information out. Because I think there are many families and teachers as well who probably would have appreciated that. I think we got to the summer, and in my conversations, at least with Abby's family as well as other families, was that basically this went away. Like the conversation stopped. And that may not be true within the district, but that goes back to that culture of mistrust is we don't know what's happening. We've stopped talking about it. So anyway, I appreciate all of the work that you put into this.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I appreciate the way that you highlighted some of the fine lines, and just in regards to Aaron's question about the board's role. It is a very tricky situation. As Gretchen pointed out, our primary job is oversight. When we're trained as board members, we're taught that our job is to have oversight and to sort of be the superintendent's boss, and that's our primary role, is to hire the superintendent, oversee the superintendent and the work that they do with staff. So we are in a governance role, is the term we like to use, is that our job is to evaluate the system and make sure the system's working the way it is. So it is tricky at any time in crisis, engaging with multiple different groups of stakeholders and making them feel valued and included. So I appreciate the way you described that, and the feedback that you gave us that we can utilize. Gretchen?
I was just going to add to what you just said. I'm not going on anything new here. I had sort of, I think, a similar thought as Aaron had when I read the parts about, that the board is specifically that the board did not provide, quote, ground level support. And at least, so I've been on the board 10 years, and in my understanding of my role, I'm not supposed to go just talk to staff. I mean, if I walked into Park Forest Middle School and said, hey, I want to go talk to the counseling office, I don't think that would go over well. So I think that if there's more face-to-face communication desired, and that I think I got that feel from what I read in your report, then I feel like that would be something that the administration would set up in order for that to happen. That wouldn't be something that I would just go,
Right.
knock on the counselor's door. So anyhow, if something like that were to be able to happen, so there was more communication, I think that'd be great. Communication did appear in your report a lot in terms of, where we could have more communication. And obviously that's one area we could have more communication. But again, I don't believe that that is the role of a board member to go do. But should something be set up, I think that that could be beneficial for everyone. So by the administration, not by
Yeah,
the board.
great point.
I think we have to be careful of our roles. And sometimes they get mixed. I am a superintendent. I am also a parent. But when I'm meeting with a teacher as a parent, I can't divorce myself of being the superintendent. I'm always the superintendent. So when board members, in whatever role or whatever meeting, they are coming across as either a friend or any other type of role, they are always still a board member. And that sometimes breeds mistrust because staff members do not know who is in front of them, whether it's a parent, whether it's a board member, or a superintendent, or whatever. And that can be somewhat confusing. And I think those are some of the things, that fine line that we talk about. We want to be all things to all people, and sometimes we cannot, given the roles that we have. That's all.
Yeah, Peter, you wanted to add something?
And I think I think one of the a challenge that is for each of the members of the board is that line it can be incredibly fine, and it can get blurred by a lot of things that we face. How we feel about the person who's in front of us, you know, the relationship that we have with them, that is in some ways like we're supposed to, like we have this role that is under law, you know, and we are still a human being, and members of the public are still a human being, a teacher is a human being, a counselor is a human being, and knowing moment to moment, or sometimes even long term, what you're supposed to do can feel incredibly conflictual. And I think that one of the things that this tragedy and the previous tragedies have shown, at least me, is the necessity of patience and grace. Those are really important qualities, I think, and practices to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And we're in a biggish town, but not a very big town. And so those relationships often overlap in a lot of different complex ways. Debbie, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to say a brief comment to reiterate the gratitude to Dr. Erbacher for your incredibly detailed work. You put a lot into it, and I think that we learned a lot from it. I have a lot of gratitude for the faculty and staff in our schools who work so hard every day. And we maybe don't say it enough, so thank you to you for that. Thank you for participating in the process. Thank you to the community for participating in the process and for asking for the process. Because even though it seems like maybe we didn't learn a lot new beyond what we knew from the internal, we didn't know that until we did this process. And so I'm hopeful that having gone through this process and everyone can take the results and we can learn and move forward together, that will help with healing some of the mistrust. That's my hope. Thanks.
Yes, I was going to say very similar things. So I am appreciative to all the community members and the staff that participated. It was an important amount of input that everyone gave, and it was a big learning process for us. And seeing the places, we did have redundancy in our own review, and your review is really helpful and I hope reassuring for some people. And then having the benefit of your expertise in the areas that we weren't aware we needed improvement on is also, you know, a wonderful investment of all this time, because that's what we wanted. So, yeah, Aaron?
I just wanted to just make a special note that I think it's important for the counselors and support staff to also understand that I at least I do, and I think the board generally recognizes the amount of work that you do, the quality of the work, and I think coming out of this, our goal is the same as yours, which is streamline the process a bit and to help you do your job better, you know, as best as possible. And looking at the numbers, hopefully at some point to lower the caseloads a little bit, because that's a lot of work that you all do. So thank you for that.
I think what I appreciate most is what I think I've heard from board members and what I've certainly heard from Dr. Urbacher's results of her endeavors is that every person you spoke to puts students at the center. And that is definitely what I try to do as a board member. I think everybody in this room, that is their goal, is that our children, as cliche as it is to say, are our future, and that all of these things that we do is with them at the center. And maybe that's a good way to wrap up, unless there's other comments or questions from board members. Okay. Well then, with that, I'm going to open up for public comment. We do have a couple people that signed up in advance. That's our new process, just to try and streamline things and be prepared. So we have just a couple people we're going to start with, and then if others want to come up and make comment, that's absolutely welcome as well. So let me just double check my list. Forgive me a second. So obviously, Ms. Black, I think you were signed up, and we'll start with you.
Jennifer Black, Half Moon Township. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Urbacher, to the board, to all of those interviewed, the teachers, and just everyone that worked so that we could glean the most information out of this as we could, because our number one priority, and the reason that we asked for this external review, was so that no other parent had to go through what we went through. And I know that's not a guarantee ever, but excuse me, we just really appreciate everyone's collaboration with that. I was extremely encouraged to see many of the recommendations, such as reviewing the referral procedures, as well as tracking student and documentation to ensure that the students don't fall through the cracks, making sure that parents are always contacted, suicide risk assessment, reentry and planning, and the revisiting of the reimplementation of middle and high school partial hospitalization programs. I know from our family those things would have been pivotal for our oldest in the last few years if that would have been available. These are all great steps for us to begin with. And I'm hopeful and eager to see a timeline for the implementation of these interventions. In line with the theme of mistrust and transparency, I'm curious how progress is going to be monitored, and how do we address accountability of making sure that these policies and procedures are followed? Will there be updates? Will there for the community? Because I know a lot of times there are updates for the board, but that does not mean there are updates for the community. Excuse me, will there be a panel or a group of parents, teachers, students, their community members to work with so that we can see if these interventions are actually being effective? Based on past board meetings, I believe that the board members and district parents were in agreement that it was of utmost importance to include the input of both students and teachers as we assessed our district policies and procedures in regards to mental health and suicide prevention. And this is one area I feel we still really need to look at. We have the input of 5 students in grades 7 through 9. How can that possibly be enough of a sample size to move forward and see how the kids actually feel and what they feel they need? We need more. We need to hear more from the students. I'm also concerned that classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, specials teachers were not given the opportunity to weigh in on other than the possibility of being chosen to be interviewed. It would be good to see where they see the gaps in our district mental health interventions, because it's important to hear from the student services staff and to see what they think is important, but we didn't look at the teachers to see how, I mean, that's my understanding at least, that no teachers were surveyed with that same information. And so I think that would be something very important to do. So I really appreciate all of the work, but I don't want us to think that our work is done. It's just beginning. I would really appreciate also more of a growth mindset, and you might think that sounds really silly because we just did a whole review on everything and we're looking for ways to change. However, something you need to understand, and some of you know this and some of you don't, that every step of the way, my husband and I have been met with reasons why things weren't possible. Why we can't inform parents that a peer has attempted suicide due to confidentiality. We can't do that. It was not a, well, let's find a way. Let's find a way to make this happen. It's a hard no till there's a law passed. We can't do an external review. There's not people who do that kind of thing. But then we looked and there were. We can't interview students because we don't want to re-traumatize them. Well, maybe it didn't work out because Dr. Erbacher wasn't able to be here in person, but maybe we can try something different so that we can find out what our students need in a way that they feel supported. And this one is hard. I've heard the phrase in reference to Abby and to this situation that unfortunately we can't reach everyone. And I've heard that far too many times. And that answer might be okay for everyone whose child is still here. But it's not enough for me because mine isn't. And so we, our community, our district, our family, we failed to save Abby. That doesn't mean we're bad people. That doesn't mean we did anything knowingly wrong. But it also doesn't mean we should just accept her as a casualty and say that some kids won't be saved. When we see a health or behavioral trend such as infant mortality or the likelihood of students using drugs or alcohol, we don't just say, well, it seems that this demographic is more likely to die, and just stop. We delve deeper and find out why that demographic is falling through the cracks. And while we do all of the above recommendations of Dr. Erbacher, I also urge us to dig deeper. Why are middle schoolers, high schoolers so unwilling to share with us their mental health struggles? The ways that we are giving them the information, is there a better way? I know I personally have never once thought that our district doesn't have resources. I've used most of them. I know that we have amazing resources. But my kids still fell through the cracks. And so there's still something we need to do. And so while I appreciate all of the resources that we have in this area and utilize them regularly, we also need to take a deeper look at kids like Abby and find out, why did she fall through the cracks? Why didn't she utilize the resources there? And yes, maybe sometimes you're just gonna have someone that happens to, but I can't take that as the answer. And so, as a school district and a community and as families, I urge us to continue to ask the hard questions and never, ever settle. I know there's no such thing as total suicide prevention, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for it. And I did want to just address two things brought up in Dr. Erbacher's review. The redundancy, whenever I was reading that, I wasn't sure what the sense of redundancy was, but thank you for explaining that it was the staff's perception of an internal review, a police investigation? Do we still really need another investigation? You have to understand, we were not given the results of the internal investigation. We as a community, we as Abby's parents, were not given the results. We were not given any results of the police investigation other than we didn't find anything. We were given nothing. We had no information. And so if it seemed redundant to those in the know and those being asked about it, you have to understand that as a community, we were flailing with nothing. And that's where the mistrust comes from. And I'm not blaming anyone, I'm saying, and I agree with what Aaron said, that's something we need to work on and figure out how to work together to make things better there. The other statement was the majority of the staff go above and beyond. I have never, ever once doubted this, and I think most of the people in our district know that we have an amazing team of teachers, of paraprofessionals, of guidance counselors, of school psychologists, board members. We have an amazing group of people. And so I don't want the staff to think that that was ever a question in our mind or in anyone's mind of how amazing of a group of people we have that we work with. We just want to make sure that we're all doing what we can and doing the best for everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, now I lost my list. No, that was me. So our usual routine is to try and keep comments to 3 minutes. I know we have many people here tonight. We have some that have raised their hand online as well. So I'm going to ask continued commenters to try to stick to that 3-minute point, if you would, to respect everybody's time and give as many people as possible an opportunity. Mr. Cole, I think we have you on my list next. And following that, I have Shoshunik, forgive me, Makaranian, sorry. Feel free to coach me through the next time. And then I think we have one person online, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the group.
Thank you. Scott Cole, Ferguson Township. I have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and it's actually quite gratifying to see that the things I wanted to talk about are now going to just be underlining a couple of the recommendations that Dr. Erbacher made. I do want to thank her for the time and effort that it took to produce the report and the review. It seems very thorough. My requests are interrelated. Make mental health support available to all students, especially in acute circumstances. When you have a student that gets physically ill or they twist their ankle in gym class, you send them to the school nurse for evaluation. And then they're either sent home or to the PCP, or maybe they can patch them up in class and send them back to class. There's nothing right now that I know of where if a kid's gonna have a panic attack or they have severe test anxiety or they have a major anger outburst in class, why wouldn't we send them to the mental health clinician for a discussion? Instead of the principal's office, for instance. Having somebody with the training in de-escalation tactics, validating a student's feelings, and just basically talking to them to find out, is there something wrong? Is this a one-off, or is something much deeper at work perhaps? And then sending them off to external services would be very much appreciated from my perspective. My daughter didn't get that kind of support in school after Brandon passed, which brings me to my other point. That's the layers of need recommendation. She was that 1 degree of separation away, along with another sibling who has since needed external supports. So don't just look at the friends of the person, of the student that passed, not just their family, not even just their school necessarily. You have to think about, well, they've got siblings, or they've got other friends and groups that they're affiliated with, and how do we support them all? So if you could please find some funding for more mental health clinicians, because the guidance counselors are absolutely fabulous at their job, but they are not mental health professionals and they shouldn't be asked to serve in that role. So more professionally trained folks in the district would allow you to serve more students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shushanik Makarian, Patton Township. May I ask a question? Is Dr. Erbacher online? Can we pose a question to her about her research? Okay.
It's just
So
public comment.
I regret that she's not online because there are a few questions I would like to pose to her as a parent. There are 4 things I want to mention today. First of all, thank you to her for the presentation, and as a parent, it was very hard to listen to it, even though we had a chance to look at the slides, and I don't know what Ms. Black is going through tonight, actually, being here. But the topic was in today's review was not just suicide, but mental health as a in a larger context. And I wanted to stress today about actual implementation mechanisms of improving student services focusing on mental health. And for that, I want to push for more feedback from students. And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask, actually, Dr. Erbacher, and if you have a chance to talk to her further, to see what are the expectations of students about mental health services offered to them. And perhaps we could do some focus groups or forums with students to receive more feedback, to understand what they expect and where there are misunderstandings about different procedures. And by this, I want not just the feedback from students, but also from teachers and the staff in schools, because it was my understanding from Dr. Erbacher's presentation that, yes, there are protocols, there are procedures, but we all know that there is one thing to have something on a paper, there is another thing to implement it, and there can be different readings of the same protocol. There are things that maybe are not implementable. So I would like to hear more about what were the things that were hard to implement in our district, what are the things that people have different expectations, perhaps. My third point would be to hear actually from Mr. Johnson, perhaps, and also from Dr. Erbacher's feedback too, about how we could improve school communication mechanism engaging teachers, staff, parents, and students. And what are some of the recommendations, perhaps from her experience that she has had, that we could have? I am an international citizen. I'm a dual citizen. And from my country's perspective, there are a lot of not parent-teacher conferences 101, but there are parents, classroom parents, and teacher conferences where all parents sometimes come and talk to the teacher all together, and that builds the community. You hear about other students, different teachers who teach specials and other subjects come in and brief parents in these forums about what they are learning, what are the expectations, which particular students may have some challenges, or not naming specifically the students, but that builds community and creates different protection mechanisms for students, and also engages teachers into kind of healthy atmosphere building. So perhaps to have some feedback from parents of what can be done in schools to improve that communication mechanism.
Okay,
Is my
thank you.
3 minutes up? Okay, fine,
Sorry.
thank you.
Thanks. Lynn, we have someone online? Yes, Brooke Sheridan. If you want to unmute yourself, if you could share your name and where you reside in the district, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, yes.
Go
this
ahead.
is, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Brooke Sheridan. I am a school bus driver. I did not have Abby. One of my friends did. And so obviously I heard all of the things because I do drive Park Forest Middle School kids on my second run in the morning. And I can't tell you how dead silent those children were. And they're children because they are just, babies. They are 6th to 8th grade. And where I came from, it was different. Came from the South. So, when we went to middle school, we were 7th through 9th. And then high school was, 10th through 12th. It was very solemn. I heard lots of rumors, lots of different things that contributed to it. And it even affected my elementary school students. I just, I don't know. I don't know. It scares me because I have kids in Grays Woods who are so very young as well. And I just want everyone to feel safe, and I always try to make everybody feel safe on my school bus. And they always will be. And I just, if something like this is going so dark, and I don't want to point out any people, but I have a neighbor who is a teacher and had heard things as well. I just, I don't really know what to say. My kids know that they're safe on my school bus as well as my kids do. And anyone can always come out and talk to me as much as they want to. Anything or anything, nothing at all. I just don't know what else really to say. I love you, Miss Black. I love everybody here in my community, and it absolutely tore my heart as well, to feel so down and out like that. But I'm always here, and that's pretty much all I have to say. So, if there's anyone that needs an out or to talk to, I'm here. I'm always, always here. And I tell my kids that, and I'm always a mom voice
Thanks,
on my
Brooke.
school bus. Okay, but I see the bullying is what I'm saying. There's bullying and bullshit, and I see it all the time, and I hear
Okay,
about
Brooke,
it.
thank you.
Okay.
Your 3 minutes are up, but thank you for your
Okay.
work with our kids.
Yes, ma'am.
Did we have anyone else online? Okay, then I'm going to open it up to the floor here in public. If there is someone online who changes their mind, they can certainly raise their hand. We'll keep our eye out for you. Anyone in person here this evening? Yeah, just come up to the podium. You can share your name, and if you just give us a general area where you reside in the district, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Ella George, and I'm from the Ferguson Township area. And forgive me, this is not the best speaker you've heard tonight. I really wasn't planning on speaking, but I actually go to the State College Area High School, and I felt like my perspective could be a little bit helpful here. I've heard a lot of people talk about these extra mental health clinicians, and I'd like to say that in the space that isn't available for students, other students are picking up that burden. And especially, I know a lot of people personally, we take on what these clinicians don't have space for, and it can become very detrimental to the environment of the high school when other students are picking up these tough tasks like self-harm, like suicide, like abuse. And we feel that because there's no space to send students to, we can't send them to these mental health clinicians, that we need to fix it personally. And when students don't have, obviously, the training or the understanding of what to do, oftentimes we handle them poorly. And that can obviously worsen the situation. And I think that if we were able to help with that ratio of student to clinician, that maybe that environment could get better and that we could see a real difference there. And I think that as a student, I just wanted to reiterate that I think the student body would be appreciative to see that ratio get better. Thank you.
Thanks, we appreciate your input. I think too, we've talked a little bit about the importance of helping students know how to send their friends to different avenues of support, whether that be through a Safe to Say or some of the SAP program, and a variety of those things. And I think we want to build trust with students that when they do that, that their friends are going to receive the support and care or get help to reach outside referral services. So we do have a lot of avenues, as Dr. Erbracher mentioned. We need to make sure that students are aware of them and that they feel confident using them. I think that's kind of our disconnect sometimes, is that students hesitate whether to do that. So It's just a little bit of added information. Others, yeah, come on up to the podium, and if you could share your name and where you.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I'm Valerie Selekia from Patton Township. First, I just want to say a big shout out to the Jana Marie Foundation because they have provided so many wonderful resources in this community. I've taken the QPR course from them, and I can't say enough wonderful things about the resources that they have. Second, I want to say that I did see that Dr. Erbacher mentioned something about parent peers. And I know that I've talked a little bit with folks at Jana Marie about there's a lot of parents in our community who I know struggle. They've either had children who have been hospitalized or they struggle with mental health from middle school to high school. I have an adult child who graduated from State High in 2020 who was hospitalized twice and is now thankfully moving forward. And she and I have just discussed in great depth the lack of peer and parent educators, like parent educators that are peers and peer adult educators who can help others who are also struggling. And I would just like to say that feel free to hit me up anytime. I'm a very recognizable person. I have no problems at all giving you my phone number or talking to you if you would like a person to talk to who has been through some of those challenging times with your child, or if you want your child to talk to my adult child who has struggled and has come through and is now on a good road, a good path. She is also very willing to talk to your child, your teenager, to help them through it if that's something that a therapist recommends. She's currently working and studying psychology at Penn State online to be a psychologist. And I think it's really important that we know that we're not alone out there, that we're not struggling on our own as parents. So I figured you should have a face, somebody to look at, to know that you're not by yourself out there thinking, why do I feel like I'm the only one going through this? So that you know there's at least some other parent who's willing to listen, to help you get through resources, who can walk you through something, because it's an awful crisis when you're dealing with it in the moment and you don't know what to do. So it's helpful to know that there's someone that you can turn to help you walk through some of those really tough first steps, and even the reentry back into school. A lot of that can be really, really hard. So just know that if you're feeling like you're struggling through any of that on your own, you're not, and you can always find me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very kind offer. Others who may want to make a public comment? Sure, come up to the podium if you want. And oh, yeah, you know the drill.
Yeah. So first, I'd really like to thank the board for providing the leadership to decide to go ahead with this external review. I think that it's been really important for the community to be able to see the results of this review, and for the families of the kids who were closely impacted by the loss of Abby. So thank you for doing that. I think there were some really clear recommendations, and I'm glad there'll be a process moving forward with them. But one of the thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know you'll be working through that process, is I was able to attend a seminar a couple months ago with Anna Mueller. She's a researcher at Indiana University, and she recently wrote a book titled Life Under Pressure, The Social Roots of Youth Suicide and What to Do About Them. And with all the work we've done in our district on student mental health and thinking about what can we do, to make students feel included, to know that they have adults at school that care about them, it's not always enough. And actually, one of the things that Anna Mueller looks at in her research is that communities like ours, where there's high expectations, where schools do have a lot of resources, where families generally do feel supported and interconnected, that these are actually the kind of communities that can be high risk for student suicide, and where you can often see student suicide clusters in communities that look just like ours. I think it might be a good idea to maybe reach out to her and see if she would be willing to do some professional development here. I know she has some local contacts, which is how I was connected to the webinar that she did, and to look at her work, because I think there's some aspects of the State College community that unfortunately are a little bit textbook in terms of seeing students sometimes being under a tremendous amount of stress. And that social connectedness, which is really a wonderful aspect of our community and is a really protective factor in many ways for students, sometimes actually is not always a protective factor when it comes to youth suicide risk. And she talks a lot about, in her research, about what can be done in the aftermath of youth suicide incidences in order to help the community grieve and be able to develop certainly like some procedures and how we support kids and how we talk about these issues. So anyways, I wanted to put that out there. I'll send it in email so that you have the reference. So thank you again.
Thanks, Amber. Anyone else here in public? Do we have any others online by chance? Just double checking. Okay. All right. I want to thank everybody for their attendance tonight. Again, thank you for everybody who participated in the review, and for the care and concern we all have for the families in our district, and particularly the Smith-Back family. All right. I'm going to call us adjourned for this evening. Have a good night.